What's going on, everyone? So today we're diving in sort of like a part 2 of yesterday's video. We get to dive in more into what's happening with set 3 meta. I know a lot of us have been looking out and seeing a lot of set 3 really popping up. And well, we got a couple of really sweet ones. Another tournament finished and we had Obi Wan sneak into the top 8, which is absolutely sweet. We get to see what people are running for Obi Wan. We had a couple of old classics like Iden Green showing up and Cad Bane Red actually taking down the whole thing. So we're going to dive into some of these lists that were shown, as well as talk about the metagame for some of these tournaments here a little bit, because, well, that's what we're looking at today. Big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. Also, I have a TCG player link. Be sure to use it. Let's dive into the lists and talk about the metagame immediately, because I don't want to waste any more time. So this was a little bit of a smaller tournament for sure. We did not really see a crazy amount of decks being played. And it looks like some of the, well, I guess you'd say scores and the actual matches weren't quite updated. But what you'll notice is a lot of set 3 options yet again. Sabine Wren being the most popular in this one. Not surprised, a lot of people have Sabine Wren. But you can see here, we've got Jango, Anakin, Maul as the next 3 most played, followed up by Cad Bane, Quinlan, Rey, and Pre-Vizsla. By the way, I do like a Pre-Vizsla. Not necessarily as a strong deck, but a really fun one. So there might be a video on that soon. But overall, again, lots of set 3 decks. However, this might just be due to set 3 being new. People want to go ahead and try it out and see what they can do, right? Like, I don't think Nalase is going to be making any waves. I don't really think, what's it called? Pre-Vizsla is going to be making any waves. I didn't even think Obi Wan was going to be making any waves, and yet it did, which is kind of cool. But let's dive into our first list here in the Cad Bane Red, the one that took down the entire tournament here. Let's pull open this list and let's see what we got here with this Cad Bane Red. So first off, Cad Bane has been on my list as one of those decks to be on the lookout for. And more importantly, this list does get to benefit from Tarkin Town. ECL, the reason why it was so good was it provided you this massive tempo advantage because of you immediately getting to attack with a very powerful unit. Tarkin Town kind of does the same thing in the sense that it gives you this mass tempo advantage, but instead of attacking with a more expensive unit, you just dominate the early game because of various things that deal damage to something. And in Jango's case, you just have a lot of things that randomly deal damage, like P38, ISB. In Cad Bane's case, you just play Underworld units. Now, what's really cool about this deck is it is a now there are 2 of them deck. So because you're playing Cad Bane, you want to be running basically all Underworld cards, which, well, suddenly allows you to play things like Bossk and Zuckuss on turn 2 with now there are 2 of them, which is an extremely powerful play, mind you. We also get to run the full 3 of new Cad Bane. We also got 3 of Jabba the Hutt, which is kind of a sweet one. So all those tricks that we're playing, which are like Shoot First, Maklunki, Waylays, now there are 2 of them. All of them are tricks, and you get to pay 1 less for them. I'm not sure about the Jabba the Hutt. I'm sure that they've gotten some value out of him and, well, have a reason to play him. I haven't really tried him all that much. That was really cool to see as well. Honestly, you're really only playing aggression or red for one reason, and that is Tarkin Town itself. The other cards that you have are like Punishing One and Ruthless Raider. Hotshot Blaster is a cunning card. So Hotshot Blaster or Punishing One and Ruthless Raider, solid cards by all means, right? Definitely could replace the Punishing One with like a 7th Fleet if you want. And Ruthless Raider, well, that one's a little bit harder to replace. But Tarkin Town is the reason why this deck is kind of in the running here. Tarkin Town just immediately gives you the ability to compete in that early game, which is something that you kind of need to be doing these days. Decks seem to have gotten really fast and, well, care a lot about controlling in that early game, and Tarkin Town does that exceptionally well. Next one up we've got is the blue Anakin here, which we've seen this one pop up more and more. This is basically what you should be expecting out of Anakin these days. Very standard curve, decent amount of space units in the early game, curving out, getting to your Lukes, and then getting value out of a lot of these random removal options, and including Force Throw, using Anakin as a win con in of himself. Now, a couple lists are running Daring Raids, a couple are not, a couple are running Bravados, a couple are not. Honestly, I've been really impressed with Bravado. One cool thing about Jedi Lightsaber is this, if you put on Anakin, gives you the on attack trigger. Now, the way Overwhelm works is you attack, you give something -2/-2. If that kills that unit, you still get to overwhelm through for damage. So this actually gives you essentially 2 additional damage to their base with Jedi Lightsaber on an Anakin. Oftentimes, if you put a Jedi Lightsaber on Anakin, this guy's swinging for like 9, 10, 11 damage into a base, which is absolutely just crazy, okay? Couple that with Bravado, and suddenly you're losing games that you thought you had no chance of losing because you just get hit for 22 in a single turn, which is just absolutely crazy, okay? I think Bravado, this is the deck for Bravado. And if you haven't tried it out, definitely recommend at least running 1 to 2 copies. It is exceptional card. Overall, that's what makes Anakin so strong, is that we have a lot of these aggro decks that are really pushing in damage. And then with Anakin, you kind of play this more defensive style with your village protectors, your interceptors, your space units. But then all of those units can trade up because of Anakin's action. You get a little restoring action going on. The force throws are extremely prevalent. And then when it comes down to it, Anakin comes down and just absolutely smacks. Absolutely smacks. Now, it still does struggle in that sense with Jango, because Jango can go ahead and exhaust Anakin on repeats, and that can be a little bit tricky. But remember, Bravado still works. If they exhaust it once, well, if they don't have another way to exhaust it, suddenly you can Bravado and smack them, which can really change the name of the game. But absolutely, I've been loving this list, and it's a lot of fun. Next up, we've got the Sabine Green, and we're not going to talk too much about this because, to be honest, these lists are basically the same since set, well, really one. From set 2, we got the Podamerons and the Wreckers. And then from set 3, as you can see it from the main deck, there is literally nothing new with the exception of a single copy of Anakin Skywalker instead of the full 3 of Podamerons. And to be honest, I am not really sure why. It might just be that they can't afford a Podameron. They don't have a Podameron. Not necessarily that they can't afford it, but they don't have another Podameron, or something else is going on. But I don't really see why you would ever be running Anakin over Podameron. Like, I just don't really see it unless you have some sort of Force synergy or Republic synergy or Jedi synergy, but that doesn't really happen here at all in this deck. So I don't really know why they're running Anakin. Maybe they're thinking, okay, that draw card is extremely relevant, but I've played a lot of Sabine, and I would not say that that is relevant over the defeating an upgrade, the dealing 2 damage, and that type of stuff with Podameron. I suppose you could say one of the cool little bit of an addition is the General Dodonna in this list. That gives you that Rebel Pump effect, which can be kind of nice. But outside of that, I guess the unique part is the sideboard, right? You get Adelphi Patrol Wings, which is kind of interesting. I played around with this card a little bit. I find that you really want a consistent early game, having a lot of 2 and 3 resource plays backed up with events, and then just relying on the K2, Podameron, and Wrecker as your top end. And I'm not a huge fan of that. Adelphi Patrol Wing as much, but overall, standard Sabine green list. There's not really too much to talk about here. You're curving out with your rebels. I suppose the only big change or adaptation is the full 3 of Bright Hopes in main deck because of the space domination lately. Next up, we've got Bossk, and you might be like, wait, where all the units go? Well, this deck is even more of a hard control list than we've seen before, which is pretty sweet. We're talking very few units. We're talking 7 units, and that is it. So lots of really interesting stuff going on. In this list, a couple of the things that I have not really, I guess you could say, dove into as much. We have a Fine Edition. So this one allows you to potentially go ahead and replay things like Perilous Position, potentially go ahead and replay things like your Bounties, Entrenched, things like that. If an enemy unit has been defeated, which is really cool, you can play your opponent's Perilous Positions, which won't really happen because you have no units. So that's not really going to happen, but you can play your own upgrades, which is pretty sweet. But outside of that, the other actual, I think, new and interesting additions from set 3, Merciless Contest. This card's been absolutely amazing in control decks. It's been a card that I think, well, we kind of expected to be good as 4th, 5th, and 6th copies of Power of the Dark Side. Bloodsport here, a little bit of a Wrath effect for the ground units, dealing 2 damage. I'm not sure why this one's in the deck. I'm not sure what they're targeting, because if you're fighting against Jangos, this does do basically nothing. And if you're fighting against other decks, usually 2 damage is enough to finish things off. But maybe in conjunction with some of these bounties like Deathmark, top target and things like that. Maybe they're going in and doing something cool there by finishing them off. One other addition is the 3 of Vanquish instead of Fell the Dragon. So they're running the full 3 of Vanquish and 0 copies of Fell the Dragon, or 0 copies of Make an Opening or anything like that. Not Fell the Dragon. They have the 2 copies of Fell the Dragon and 2 copies of Takedown here, which is pretty interesting. They actually went the full 3 of Takedown and like 1 of 2 of Vanquish. I have found more success with the full 3 of Takedowns in the meta, but maybe the Vanquish is just working specifically good against certain decks, which can absolutely do work against things like, well, for example, Ruthless Raider, which is pretty popular. Vanquish does deal with that pretty nicely. And as I mentioned before, even set 3 began, I think people are sleeping on Vanquish. It's a card that I've been playing 1 to 2 of over Rivals Fall in a lot of situations, because generally speaking, dealing with the leader is not like a crazy thing that you must be doing, but instead dealing with these big units is way more important. The other really interesting card to me is Imprisoned. This basically removing all abilities and can't gain abilities on certain cards. I'm not exactly sure what the target for this is. Maybe it's like a Ruthless Raider to prevent the damage. Maybe it's like some sort of death trigger. Maybe it's some sort of on attack trigger. I'm not sure. I would love to hear the logic behind Imprisoned. I always every single time I played this card, I felt it to be pretty underwhelming. But again, maybe they have a specific target in mind, and that's why it's in the deck. They even have another one in the sideboard, which is pretty interesting. So this one is by far one of the most hard control lists we've ever seen, realistically. Just the full of 7 units, and it's like basically all expensive units, and then the client, which is pretty sweet to see. But I think Bossk Blue has been very good. The perilous positions coming in, very solid stuff. Next up, we've got Iden Green. Now, this one was really interesting to me, and I was really curious to see what new cards from set 3 are we dropping in this Iden deck. And honestly, there's a lot. Out of any of the lists here, this is one of those decks that is on the higher end of brand new cards from set 3. So first off, we're not running ECL, running that 30 HP base, but we're actually running a minor separatist synergy. And the reason for that is Droid Commando. And honestly, I am not surprised by this. Droid Commando has been one of those cards for me that has been one of the most impressive, kind of underrated cards, but because it requires you to have other separatists, it's hard to make function. Now with Iden, you've got a few different units. You've got Rune Hako, Confederate Courier as separatist units on turn 1, both of which from set 3. Confederate Courier trades really well in a lot of units these days. Kylo Silencer, Mercenary Gunship, the P-38s all trade with Confederate Courier, and you get a 1/1 left over. Rune Hako does really nicely as it can shrink down some stuff. Overall, just a 3/2, which can be pretty good. But then on turn 2, you get to curve in a Droid Commando and Calculating Magna Guard, a little bit of a Sentinel or Ambusher. We've got Ki-Adi Mundi coming in on 5 resources, which is just a solid body, just something that can basically survive anything. And then we got the late game win con of classic villainy, kind of soft control green, which is Darth Vader, Mauls, Reinforcement Walkers, Snokes, and Avengers to finish out the game. A little bit of ramp and resupply, Super Laser Technician. And this seems like a classic Iden green deck, but with a little bit of spice from set 3, which honestly looks absolutely sweet. I have not tried this sort of like minor separatist synergy with the Droid Commando, but I definitely want to give it a try because I think it looks absolutely sweet to be playing. But really nice work from the Iden player here. Next up, we've got Ray Red coming in. So Ray Red, very solid list, and honestly not really super surprised to see this one. I spoke about Ray Red being as one of the kind of decks to look out for, especially because Tarkin Town is one of those decks that you really want, and Rey kind of does that same thing that Anakin does, but gives you permanent value instead of temporary damage increasing. But I do think Anakin has shaped up a little bit better in the meta, which is why you're not seeing as much Rey. So the first thing that I noticed is this is like basically Rey Red from the other sets. The only new addition to the deck in the main deck is the 2 of Hello There's, which I think makes a lot of sense. But they're not running the perilous position plus Razor Crest kind of combo, and I think that actually is something that they're missing. I would much rather replace these making openings with perilous position and then maybe run a couple of Razor Crests here and there just to get that synergy in the deck. Because I think making opening is way too narrow when you have something like perilous position available to you. So that's something that I maybe would change up for me, but maybe they found that make it opening is just that good, right? Make it opening is very good if your opponent's playing like Django and they've done some damage to your base and you get the heal as well, and you're just trying to kill a unit. But of course, when you consider Razor Crest being in a very, very good spot, just because opponents are paying space units, getting that restored to and buying back that perilous position just might be good enough to play even over make an opening in that specific scenario. So pretty cool there. Senatorial Corvette is in the sideboard. Nice little space unit that does discard a card when it dies. Kind of interesting. I think that card is pretty solid. It also has Saboteur, which means that it can get through shield tokens, which I think is pretty relevant as well. But overall, Tarkin Town on an early game deck, really, really important. And I think Ray is benefiting from that massively. And is this the last one? No, we got 2 more to talk about. We've got the Sabine Green List Part 2. This one is pretty cool because they are playing a couple of new set 3 cards. I decided to put both of them on this because, again, the other one was like a classic Sabine Green list. This one, still classic Sabine Green, but there's 2 cards I want to mention really quickly. Jyn Erso, this one, anytime a unit dies, you get the +1/+0 and Saboteur, which can actually be pretty relevant. She's also a rebel. I think she's pretty solid. I do think the 2 toughness is a big downside. Now, if they didn't have the 2 toughness, it was a 3/3, this card would be amazing. But because that 2 toughness, things like Crafty Smuggler just make Jyn Erso look silly. Honestly, it does. So I think with those types of cards, you're going to need like Saboteur. For example, like I think Ketsu Onyo, despite not having the Rebel tag, has some viability because you can attack into the base and defeat a shield token, which is pretty relevant. But the other one is Ahsoka's Lightsaber. Now, no Ahsoka's in the deck, but just as a 1 cost +2/+0. It's pretty straightforward. So what's interesting about this, to be honest, is if you're going to go with a +2/+0 upgrade, right, that attaches to a non-vehicle, right, you have no Ahsokas, you should just be playing Hotshot Blaster. Like, not playing Hotshot Blaster makes 0 sense because Hotshot Blaster has the off chance of you being able to pay 5 from the resource pile if you ever resource it to get some value. So to me, this is kind of sweet, but also makes 0 sense to me because there is no Ahsoka Tano's, right? No Ahsoka Tano's in the list. And you're playing a +2/+0 upgrade, which is what Hotshot Blaster is. So not really sure why they're playing Ahsoka's Lightsaber over that. Maybe just because of the sweetness. But yeah, Hotshot Blaster should just be in the deck instead. It's literally just a 1 cost upgrade in aggression that gives you +2/+0, right? And then you have the odds chance of getting it from the smuggle pile. This one doesn't even attach to vehicles. But next up and lastly, and most importantly, we've got ourselves Obi Wan. Now this deck is sweet. This is full of set 3 cards alongside the list we talked about earlier. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting the name. Oh, the Iden list. This is by far the one most dominated by set 3 cards. Obviously, Obi Wan, surprising one, giving that heal value throughout the game, giving that Sentinel on flip. But some new cards. We got Royal Guard Attaché, going ahead and dealing some damage to this unit. You can basically heal it up with Obi Wan, making it a 2/4, which can be pretty relevant. The 2 damage to that unit, though, can be a little bit risky because it can basically sign you up for a Tarkin Town immediately. So, in some cases, that could be a little bit risky. Hu Yang, love this card. Super, super solid card. Really, really solid in terms of curving into Hu Yang and getting a lot of value. We've got Obi-Wan's Ether Sprite, which I think is an amazing card in the meta right now, just dealing with all those space units. We've got Ayla Sakura with the ECL. Obi-Wan, Rey, Ayla, and General Raiken all could be ECL'd out. General Raiken giving you that Sentinel. But then we also have Hello There's, Perilous Positions, and General's Blade to drop on those Jedi. Basically, the idea of this deck is to get a little bit of value from these heals and then just have this massive amount of Sentinel just domination to make it so your opponent really can't function in the ground arena. Now, I will say the one thing that's a little bit scary is we're a little bit lighter on ways to interact with space, right? We have the Concord Dawn Interceptors, which I think is really important. We have Obi-Wan's Ether Sprite, which I think is really good. And then we have the Restored Arcs. But that's basically it because Redemption is usually way too late to really matter. But that is assuming they're running the full 3 of Restored Arcs, but this site for some reason can't show it. We have a total of 7 space units, so I think that is a little bit risky. You do have the Hello There's, the Takedowns, and the Fellow Dragons, and the Perilous Position, which could interact as well. But I think this deck could benefit potentially from another copy of Obi-Wan's Ether Sprite, but that also ends up in the sideboard, means that we can run the Bright Hopes as well, which look really nice in this deck. Honestly, it does make sense in some senses to run some Bright Hopes in the main deck, but it's a little bit tricky to what to pull from, because the General's Blade does work nicely on Hu Yang. It works nicely on, well, Kanan. It works nicely on Ayla. It works nicely on Luke. It works nicely on Obi Wan, especially on Obi Wan, giving you a 7/10 Sentinel. But regardless, it is absolutely awesome to see an Obi Wan list here in the top 8. And to be fair, I've only played a little bit with Obi Wan, so the person who's running this list has a ton more experience, I imagine, than I do. And so maybe they're like, you know what? The problem with the space units didn't come up that often because X reason, Y reason. Obi-Wan's Ether Sprite being ambushed or ECL'd out, remember, gives you that when played on and on attack trigger. So you can deal 4 total damage to 2 separate units, 2 damage to 1 unit, 2 damage to another, and you get to ambush with the Obi-Wan's Ether Sprite. And oftentimes your Obi-Wan's Ether Sprite will still live. For example, let's take your opponent's got, well, I don't know, like a silencer, a mercenary gunship, and let's say a P-38. Well, you ECL out Obi-Wan's Ether Sprite, you deal 1 damage, kill a TIE silencer, deal 1 damage, kill the mercenary gunship, ambush then the P-38, and suddenly you're left with a 4/1 Obi-Wan's Ether Sprite, and they have to finish it off with a P-38 trigger. That kills 3 space units in a single ECL. That is absolutely crazy. I've been really impressed with Obi-Wan's Ether Sprite if you are dealing with a lot of space units, and right now we are. So I think that's a card that you really do have to be on the lookout for. Another card that I was a little bit surprised to see is Val. We haven't really seen much of this card at all. The whole idea is that you're going to have these really high toughness units that can survive this bounty trigger, even if your opponent's hitting it first. And then you could heal up that damage from Obi-Wan, which is kind of sweet as well. Of course, Obi-Wan can also heal up Obi-Wan's Ether Sprite. It can heal up your Village Protectors, your Interceptors, whatever it is, just giving you these constant little bit of value pieces. I'd be curious to see how often you're actually using Obi-Wan's action on the front side. And what about Obi-Wan is causing you to play Obi-Wan, right? Like if I were to play this deck, but instead of running Obi-Wan, I would just be putting in, I don't know, let's say a Rey, for example. Would it be better? Right? I don't know. Like, could I just be pumping up the Hu Yang with experience tokens? Could I be pumping the Conquered Interceptors, the Village Protectors, etc.? Literally playing the exact same list with the exact same cards, but instead playing Rey. Would it be better? I'm not actually sure. I'd have to try it out. But again, that all kind of relies around the person who's playing Obi-Wan. Are you using that trigger a ton? Maybe with the Royal Guard Attaché, you actually are, and things like that. But at least in my experience of playing Obi-Wan, it's minorly useful. I think I would prefer to be playing Rey, but it also could be that you're just benefiting from the Sentinel on the flip side. But that's going to wrap up kind of all the lists that we have in terms of the actual deck lists that we are able to see. I want to mention real quickly that there was another tournament here, and it looks like the New Han Blue and Sabine Green taking top spots in that. I think a lot of people are kind of starting to experiment a little bit more and return to some of the old classics because there are some massive changes that have happened. And honestly, I've been really excited about set 3 because set 2 didn't really make an impact on the meta as much as I think set 3 has already. The leaders, the amount of leaders that have become viable, that in conjunction with the Boba ban really shook up the meta. But also the cards that we're seeing from set 3 a lot are cards that, well, are like commons and uncommons, which doesn't really happen from set 2, right? Like if you look at set 2, some of the cards that you're playing, I guess a lot of them were uncommons, but there are a lot of commons from set 3 that are being played, which I was a little bit surprised about, like Perilous Position, P-38, that type of stuff, which is really, really cool to see. So let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.